Hello folks. Thank you for joining me once again as I discuss and analyze another national park missing person case. In this case study, I'm going to talk about another well-known case involving the strange disappearance of a 41-year-old park ranger named Paul Braxton Fugate, who vanished inside the Chiricahua National Monument in January of 1980. Even though it's going on nearly 40 years, the circumstances following his disappearance continues to baffle many. And just like we saw with the Stacey Harris case, there are more questions than answers. I chose this case because Paul was a seasoned park ranger who knew the park like the back of his hand, and despite everything thrown into the search, he was never found. This just goes to show you that if the National Park Service is unable to find one of their own, then we're completely left out in the cold as to what happened. So let's begin. On January 13th of 1980, Park Ranger Paul Fugate, the only member of the permanent staff on duty that day, walked out of his office to check out a nature trail. I believe this was probably a routine grounds check. He left instructions for the only other person in the office, who was a seasoned employee, to shut down the park operations without him if he did not return by 4:30. I'm assuming this was normal for him to stay later, but I could be wrong. So according to the other employee, Paul walked down toward the Chiricahua National Monument entrance, and that was the last time he was ever seen. No trace of him was ever found despite an extensive search and rescue party by the National Park Service, the Cochise County Sheriff's Department, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, Southern Arizona Search and Rescue Association, Customs, Border Patrol, and Paul's many friends and family. As you can see, this was no small feat, and definitely not your average missing person search. We'll get more into this search shortly, but first, let's talk about the park itself. According to the National Park Service, the park is approximately 12,000 acres of rock pinnacles, which are the result of erosion of compacted volcanic ash from an ancient volcano. It is called the Wonderland of Rocks, and if you look at the pictures, you'll see why. It is considered a unit of the National Park Service and located inside the Chiricahua Mountains of southeastern Arizona. The monument was established in 1924 as a way of protecting those rocks, and the park sees an average of nearly 52,000 visitors annually. So who was Paul exactly? And what role did he play in park operations? Paul was a naturalist whose job was to gather knowledge of the park and provide educational programs to visitors. In the late 1970s, he was let go from his position for violating uniform and hygiene practices, mainly for having long hair and a beard. After disputing this, he was reinstated and his back pay and benefits were restored. He spent several years working in the park before he vanished. Here's a little bit more information about his disappearance. According to the other employee, when he left the office on that January afternoon, he entered a trail leading to Fairway Ranch, a 400-acre parcel of land recently acquired by the monument. The area in and around the monument, located about 60 miles from Mexico, has been known for its drug smuggling problem. According to theblaze.com, an online Arizona news bulletin, a National Park Service employee in southeastern Arizona was beaten unconscious and left for dead after being found by a hiker in a known drug smuggling corridor in August of 2013. The 60-year-old female interpretive ranger was found in one of the park's restrooms, bloodied with a severe head injury. Authorities were unable to find any suspects or motive in the attack, but stated her government vehicle was missing from the park and later tracked to a city 40 miles away. Even though Paul's disappearance occurred 33 years prior to the incident, no one can help but wonder if something similar happened to him. Since we're on the subject, I think it's important to mention this other detail as well. The only other clue about Paul's disappearance came from a retired police officer who stated that he thought he saw him the day he vanished, sitting motionless between two men in a pickup truck that was leaving the monument. But he also stated that he was not wearing his glasses at the time and therefore didn't get a clear look. This report has led Mrs. Fugate and others connected with the case to believe he was possibly abducted after interrupting two men engaging in illegal activity at the park. However, it's also worth mentioning that Paul carried a radio and a firearm, so the likelihood he would have disappeared into thin air without calling for help or fighting back is slim. This also goes against the eyewitness report given by the seasonal employee, who watched Paul enter that trail, which search dogs were able to verify when they eventually tracked a scent into that trail as well. Speaking of the dogs, let's get into the search itself. The search consisted of several hundred people, which included professional search and rescue teams, search dogs, helicopters, park rangers and park rangers on horseback, volunteers, and the many friends and family members Paul had. They covered over 17 square miles of the monument, spending a solid 2 weeks searching until all funding and resources dried up. Some friends, family, and volunteers continued searching for months after the official search ended. This was the largest search effort ever coordinated for a national park missing person case in the history of Arizona and involved more agencies than any other case. But even so, no trace of Paul was ever located. A reward of $10,000 was offered for information leading to his whereabouts, but even after 38 years, no information has come forward. So let's talk a little bit about what may have happened to Paul. Search details show that his scent was tracked down the trail that would eventually lead to Fairway Ranch. But they don't even tell us how far it went, so we really have no idea where Paul ended up going, but only where he might have been heading. When he left the office, he didn't really give any specifics on where he was going exactly, and what he would do when he arrived there, so we can only assume this was a routine patrol. Is it possible that Paul came across another hiker or smuggler and was met with foul play? Sure, but then again, there was no evidence pointing to this. Paul knew those trails well, and he would check them on a regular basis as part of his duties. It's hard to believe he would have gotten lost and swallowed up by the wilderness. He carried a radio and had protection on him. Now, could he have attempted radio communications at some point? We don't exactly know much about the radio he was carrying, or any other detail about the radio's capabilities. Now, let's assume that Paul had an accident and became incapacitated. The park does have some pretty rough geological features, and if he found himself in a dangerous situation, his survival may have depended on calling for help. Would he have been able to depend on that radio? If not, the firearm he carried could have been used to help pinpoint his location. Most park rangers are trained in these kinds of situations and know that firing 3 shots into the air is a sign of distress, and others will know to send for help. But no gunshots or radio clickings were heard during the time. Is it possible he was taken out of the park? If so, where's the evidence pointing to this? Did the seasonal employee who last saw Paul leave out any important details about that afternoon? Did the search actually cover those 17 square miles? And if so, are there any caverns or bodies of water we don't know about? I believe Paul never left that trail once he entered it. I think something else happened to him, and for whatever reason, searchers either missed him or may have overlooked an important detail. I believe the answer is still out there and in that monument. Before I wrap things up, I wanted to mention that this is not the first time someone's gone missing in that park. In the summer of 2015, a 44-year-old woman named Janet Castrogen vanished outside of a park restroom, and just a couple months after that, a 69-year-old named Lawrence Cosden disappeared with his cat while camping inside of that park. No trace of either person has ever surfaced, despite extensive search and rescue efforts. Perhaps one day we'll find the answers we're looking for, but until then, we can only speculate as to what happened. Thanks again for joining me on this case, and may we never forget the sad and strange disappearance of Paul Braxton Fugate.